In the mountains of Eastern Europe, where morning mist clings to ancient pine trees like secrets waiting to be told, an 18-year-old girl named Elena Kozlov made a decision that would either save 12 lives or end her own. With calloused fingers wrapped around a rifle older than she was, Elena had exactly one bullet left and 30 seconds before her position would be discovered. The military commanders had laughed when she volunteered for the rescue mission. "Send the child home," they said. "This is men's work." But as Elena lay flat against the cold earth, watching enemy soldiers through her scope, she knew something those seasoned officers didn't. Sometimes, the most impossible missions require the most unlikely heroes. What happened next would be whispered about in military academies for decades to come, not because it was unbelievable, but because it was so perfectly, devastatingly real. This is the story of how one teenage girl with steady hands and an unshakable heart proved that courage doesn't come with age, rank, or recognition. It comes from the moment you decide that someone else's life matters more than your own fear. Elena's story begins 3 weeks earlier, in a small village where the sound of distant artillery had become as common as morning birdsong. The morning Elena Kozlov first held her grandfather's hunting rifle, she was 7 years old and barely tall enough to see over the kitchen table. The weapon seemed enormous in her small hands, its wooden stock worn smooth by decades of use. Her grandfather, Victor, watched with the careful attention of a man who understood that some lessons couldn't wait for convenient timing. "A rifle is not a toy, little wolf," he said, using the nickname he'd given her for her fierce independence. "It's a responsibility. Every bullet carries the weight of a decision." Elena lived in Krasny Bor, a village of perhaps 300 people nestled in the Carpathian Mountains between Romania and Ukraine. The houses were built from local stone and timber, their steep roofs designed to shed heavy mountain snow. Gardens flourished in the short summers, and smoke from wood-burning stoves painted grey ribbons against winter skies. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where children played in streets that hadn't changed in centuries. Viktor Kozlov had been a sniper during the Soviet era, though he rarely spoke of those years. His neighbors knew him as a quiet man who could track a deer through forests so thick you couldn't see 10 meters ahead. What they didn't know was that he held the unofficial record for the longest confirmed kill in his former unit. That knowledge died with his military service, buried beneath years of peaceful hunting and teaching his granddaughter to read the wind. Elena's parents had died in a car accident when she was 5. The mountain roads could be treacherous in winter, and a patch of black ice had sent their old sedan spinning into a ravine. Victor had raised her since then, and she had absorbed his lessons like a young tree growing towards sunlight. By age 10, she could field dress a rabbit. By 12, she could hit a playing card at 50 meters. By 15, she understood the mathematics of ballistics better than most college students understood basic algebra. The old man never intended to create a warrior. He simply wanted to pass on the skills that had kept him alive during his own dangerous youth. He taught her to be patient, to control her breathing, to read the subtle signs that separated a good shot from a wasted bullet. Most importantly, he taught her that true marksmanship wasn't about the gun or even the shooter. It was about understanding the moment when action became necessary. Elena attended the village school until she was 16, walking 3 kilometers each way through forests that changed with the seasons. She was a bright student, particularly gifted in mathematics and physics, though her teachers sometimes found her too serious for her age. While other girls her age gossiped about boys in fashion magazines, Elena spent her free time studying wind patterns and trajectory calculations. The transformation of Elena's world began gradually, like a storm gathering on a distant horizon. First came the news reports on the old radio Victor kept in his workshop. Tensions were rising in the region. Political boundaries that had seemed permanent were suddenly being questioned. Then came the refugees, families traveling through their village with tired eyes and stories of violence that seemed impossible to believe. The first military checkpoint appeared on the road leading to town in early spring of Elena's 18th year. Soldiers in unfamiliar uniforms questioned travelers, demanding identification and searching vehicles. Victor watched these developments with the careful attention of someone who had seen history repeat itself before. "Wars don't start with declarations," he told Elena one evening as they cleaned their rifles together. "They start with small changes that people choose to ignore until it's too late to choose anything at all." By midsummer, the changes were no longer small. The village found itself caught between advancing military forces, each claiming to represent justice and stability. The checkpoint became a permanent garrison. Helicopters flew overhead with increasing frequency. Young men from neighboring villages disappeared, some to join various military units, others simply vanishing without explanation. Elena continued her daily routines, helping Victor with his small farm and maintaining the skills he had taught her. She practiced her shooting in a hidden valley behind their house, using targets Victor constructed from scrap wood and paper. Her accuracy had reached levels that would have impressed professional snipers, though neither she nor her grandfather fully understood how exceptional her abilities had become. The morning that changed everything arrived in late August, carried by a refugee family that stumbled into Krasny Bor just after dawn. The Petrov family had been traveling for 3 days, fleeing from a town 40 kilometers away, where fighting had erupted without warning. They brought news that made Victor's weathered face grow pale with recognition. "They took the children first," Mrs. San, Petrov explained to a gathering of concerned villagers in the town square. Said they needed to be relocated for their safety. 12 of them, ranging in age from 8 to 15. Put them on a truck and drove away before anyone could object. Her husband continued the story with hands that trembled from exhaustion and grief. "We tried to follow, but the roads were blocked. Military units everywhere. No one would tell us where the children were taken or why." Elena listened to their account with growing anger that surprised her with its intensity. She had always been protective of those smaller and weaker than herself, but this felt different. These weren't abstract victims from news reports. These were children who could have been her schoolmates, taken from parents who could have been her neighbors. That evening, Victor found Elena sitting on their front porch, staring toward the mountains where the refugees said the children had been taken. She held her rifle across her lap, not cleaning it but simply holding it, as if drawing comfort from its familiar weight. "I know what you're thinking, little wolf," Victor said, settling into the chair beside her. "Do you?" Elena asked without looking at him. "You're thinking that someone should go find those children. You're thinking that the adults who should handle the situation are either too afraid or too compromised to act. You're thinking that maybe a young person with certain skills might be able to accomplish what others cannot." Elena turned to study her grandfather's face in the dim light from their kitchen window. "And what do you think about what I'm thinking?" Victor was quiet for a long moment, and Elena could see him wrestling with competing instincts. The protective grandfather who wanted to keep her safe warred with the former soldier who understood that sometimes safety was an illusion and action was the only moral choice. "I think," he said finally, "that you have been trained for something, though neither of us knew what that something would be. I think you have abilities that were meant to serve a purpose beyond target practice and hunting deer. And I think that when the moment comes to use those abilities for something that truly matters, you will know it." The next morning brought confirmation that the moment Victor had described was approaching rapidly. Government forces had established a command post in the town of Valkov, 15 kilometers from where the children were believed to be held. Elena walked there before dawn, telling Victor she wanted to gather information about the situation. The command post was chaos barely contained by military discipline. Officers hurried between tents and radio stations, managing a crisis that seemed to expand faster than their ability to control it. Elena approached a young lieutenant who looked overwhelmed by paperwork and asked if there was any news about the missing children. The lieutenant barely looked up from his maps. "Missing children are not our priority right now. We have strategic objectives to secure. Civilians need to stay out of military zones and let us do our jobs," Elena persisted, explaining that she lived in the area and might be able to help with local knowledge. The lieutenant's response was a dismissive wave toward a group of older officers discussing plans around a field table. "If you want to help, talk to them. But don't waste time with impossible rescue missions. Those children are probably already moved to a secure location far from here. Best thing for everyone is to let the diplomats handle negotiations." Elena approached the officers, recognizing the insignia of Colonel Davidov, the regional commander. She had seen his photograph in newspapers, usually accompanying stories about successful military operations and strategic victories. In person, he looked tired and frustrated, like a man dealing with problems that had no clean solutions. When Elena explained her request to help locate the missing children, the colonel's initial reaction was patient but firm. "Young lady, I appreciate your concern, but this is a complex military situation. We have trained professionals working on every aspect of this crisis, including the civilian displacement issues." "With respect, Colonel," Elena said, surprised by her own boldness, "those 12 children aren't a displacement issue. They're specific individuals being held against their will by people who took them for a reason. Someone should be trying to find out where they are and bring them home." Colonel Davidov studied Elena more carefully, noting something in her tone that suggested this wasn't a naive civilian making emotional demands. "And what exactly are you proposing? That we divert military resources from strategic objectives to search for children who may not even be in this region anymore?" "I'm proposing that I go find them myself. The silence that followed Elena's statement was broken only by the distant sound of helicopter rotors and radio chatter from nearby communications tents.
The officers stared at her with expressions ranging from surprise to amusement to concern.
"Miss," said Major Petkoff, the colonel second in command, "I'm sure you mean well, but this isn't a situation for civilian volunteers."
Especially not young civilians who have no understanding of what they would be walking into. Elena felt heat rising in her cheeks, but kept her voice steady. "Major, I've lived in these mountains my entire life. I know every trail, every hiding spot, every route someone might use to move people without being detected. I also know that your trained professionals are focused on fighting a war, not conducting rescue operations." Colonel Davidov raised a hand to quiet the other officers who were beginning to voice objections. "Miss Kozlov, what makes you think you could succeed where military units would struggle?" "Because I wouldn't be trying to fight an army, Colonel. I would be trying to find 12 children and bring them home. Those are completely different missions requiring completely different approaches." The colonel walked to a map spread across the field table, pointing to an area marked with red pins and warning symbols. "Intelligence suggests the children are being held somewhere in this region. It's controlled by irregular forces with experience in guerrilla warfare and intimate knowledge of local terrain. They have armed checkpoints on all major routes and patrol patterns designed to detect exactly the kind of infiltration you're suggesting." Elena joined him at the map, studying the terrain features and noting landmarks she recognized. "Colonel, may I ask how your intelligence was gathered?" "Aerial reconnaissance, intercepted communications, reports from local contacts," Major Petkov answered. "Standard intelligence gathering methods. All of which would be detected by people who expect to be monitored," Elena observed. "Has anyone actually walked through this area to see what's really happening on the ground?" The officers exchanged glances that confirmed Elena's suspicion. Their intelligence was based on remote observation and electronic surveillance, not human reconnaissance. They were fighting a modern military campaign against opponents who were using older, simpler methods that didn't show up on satellite images or radio intercepts. "Miss Kozlov," Colonel Davidov said after a moment, "even if we accepted your assessment of our intelligence limitations, what exactly would you propose to do differently?" Elena pointed to a series of mountain trails marked on the map as secondary routes. "I would approach on foot using paths that don't appear on military maps. I would travel light and fast, avoiding known patrol routes. I would locate the children, assess the situation, and develop a rescue plan based on actual observation rather than assumptions. And if you encounter hostile forces," Major Petkov asked, "I would avoid them if possible." If avoidance wasn't possible, Elena paused, realizing that her next words would reveal capabilities she had never discussed with anyone except Victor. "I have certain skills that might be useful in that situation." Colonel Davidov studied Elena's face, noting something in her expression that suggested confidence based on more than naive optimism. "What kind of skills?" Elena met his gaze steadily. "Marksmanship skills, Colonel. Ones that might allow me to remove specific threats while minimizing overall risk." The conversation that followed would later be remembered by everyone present as the moment when a military operation shifted from conventional strategy to something unprecedented. Elena explained her background and training in terms that gradually convinced the officers that she wasn't a civilian playing soldier. She was someone with genuine capabilities who understood both the risks and the requirements of what she was proposing. Colonel Davidov made the decision that would set everything in motion. "Ms. Kozlov, I cannot officially authorize a civilian rescue mission. However, if a local resident chose to gather information about missing children from her community, and if that information proved valuable to our broader military objectives, we would certainly be grateful for her civic contribution." Elena understood the colonel's careful phrasing. He was giving her unofficial permission to attempt something that official military doctrine couldn't support. If she succeeded, her mission would be retroactively endorsed. If she failed or was captured, the military would have no knowledge of her activities. "I understand, Colonel. And if this local resident were to need certain equipment for her information-gathering activities? Equipment for civilian hiking and camping would be her own responsibility," the colonel replied. "However, if she happened to find certain items that appeared to have been abandoned or lost in the field, that would be a fortunate coincidence." Elena left the command post that afternoon with a small backpack containing items that had indeed been found near the military camp. A scope for her grandfather's rifle, ammunition that matched the weapon's caliber, maps marked with detailed topographical information, a radio with encryption capabilities, food and medical supplies sufficient for a week-long hiking trip. Her official status was that of a concerned local resident seeking information about missing children. Her actual mission was a solo reconnaissance and rescue operation that would either save 12 young lives or add a 13th name to the list of people who had disappeared in the mountains of Eastern Europe. Victor was waiting when Elena returned home that evening. He had spent the day preparing for a conversation he had been dreading since the morning she first picked up his rifle. "The little wolf is ready to hunt," he said simply. "The little wolf has been ready for some time," Elena replied. She just needed to understand what she was hunting for. They spent that evening reviewing maps and discussing tactical considerations that Victor had hoped never to teach his granddaughter. But as they planned Elena's route and discussed contingencies, Victor realized that the skills he had passed on weren't just about marksmanship or survival. They were about the kind of courage that showed up when courage was the only option left. Elena would leave before dawn, beginning a mission that would test everything she had learned and transform her from a village girl with exceptional shooting ability into something much more dangerous and much more necessary. The 12 children waiting in the mountains didn't know help was coming. Neither did the people who had taken them. But Elena knew. And that knowledge, combined with one rifle and the skills to use it, would prove to be enough. Elena left her grandfather's house at 4 in the morning, moving through familiar darkness with the confidence of someone who had walked these paths since childhood. The weight of her backpack felt natural across her shoulders, and Victor's rifle rested in a custom case strapped to her side. She had chosen to travel light, carrying only essential equipment and 3 days' worth of food. Speed and stealth would matter more than comfort on this mission. The first phase of her journey followed hunting trails she had used hundreds of times before, winding paths that deer and hunters had worn into the mountainside over generations. Victor had taught her to read these trails like text, understanding how wildlife moved through the forest, and where humans were most likely to encounter natural obstacles. The familiar rhythm of hiking helped calm her nerves as she covered the first 10 kilometers before sunrise. As dawn broke over the eastern peaks, Elena reached her first checkpoint, a rocky overlook that provided views of the valley where intelligence reports suggested the children were being held. She had visited this spot many times with Victor, using it as a vantage point for tracking deer movements and studying weather patterns. Now she was using those same skills to observe human activity that could determine whether 12 children lived or died. Through her scope, Elena could see the valley settlement that matched descriptions from military briefings. It consisted of perhaps 20 buildings arranged around a central square, with agricultural fields extending toward the surrounding forest. Smoke rose from several chimneys, indicating normal civilian activity, but Elena noticed details that suggested the village was under some form of military control. Armed checkpoints guarded both road approaches to the settlement. Guards walked regular patrols along predetermined routes. Vehicles moved with the purposeful efficiency of military transport rather than civilian traffic. Most telling of all, Elena observed no children playing in areas where children should naturally be visible during morning hours. She spent 2 hours documenting everything she could observe from this position, sketching building layouts and noting personnel patterns in a small notebook Victor had given her years earlier for tracking animal behavior. The skills translated perfectly to surveillance work, requiring the same patience and attention to detail that made the difference between successful hunting and wasted time. Elena's first encounter with hostile forces came sooner than expected. As she prepared to move to her next observation point, the sound of approaching voices forced her to take cover behind a cluster of large boulders. 3 armed men in civilian clothing were climbing toward her position, speaking in low voices about patrol schedules and coordination with other units. Elena's heart rate increased, but her breathing remained controlled, just as Victor had taught her during their hunting exercises. She had 2 choices: remain hidden and hope the patrol passed without detecting her presence, or take decisive action to prevent them from reporting an intruder in the area. The decision would establish the tone for everything that followed. The men were clearly not professional soldiers, but they carried military weapons and moved with the confidence of people accustomed to controlling their territory. Elena could hear enough of their conversation to understand that they were discussing plans to move their prisoners to a different location within the next 24 hours. Whatever rescue operation she was planning would need to happen quickly, before the children disappeared entirely. Elena chose patience over aggression, remaining motionless behind the rocks while the patrol passed within 20 meters of her position. Her camouflage clothing and natural cover kept her invisible, but the encounter confirmed that the area was under active surveillance. Any movement would need to be carefully planned and executed with minimal exposure. After the patrol disappeared down the trail, Elena altered her route to approach the valley from an unexpected direction. Instead of following the obvious paths that connected mountain peaks to valley floor, She chose to descend through a steep ravine that would be difficult to patrol, but would bring her much closer to the target settlement. The ravine descent required technical climbing skills that Victor had taught her during summer expeditions to remote hunting areas. Elena moved methodically down rock faces and through dense undergrowth, using natural features to mask both her movement and her scent from potential guards or tracking animals. The approach took 3 hours longer than direct routes would have required, but it delivered her to an observation position less than 200 meters from the settlement's outer buildings. From this new vantage point, Elena could observe details that changed her understanding of the situation entirely. The settlement wasn't just under military control. It was serving as a temporary holding facility for multiple groups of prisoners. In addition to the 12 children from the nearby village, Elena counted at least 8 adult civilians and what appeared to be captured soldiers from government forces. The prisoners were being held in a converted barn on the settlement's eastern edge, guarded by 2 men who changed shifts every 4 hours. Elena observed the guard rotation twice, noting that there was always a 15-minute overlap when both guards were present, and a brief period during shift changes, when attention was focused on communication rather than observation. More importantly, Elena discovered that the settlement's defensive preparations were designed to repel conventional military assault, not to prevent infiltration by a single individual with specialized skills. Guards watched road approaches and high ground that vehicles or large units would need to use, but they paid little attention to areas accessible only to someone willing to move on foot through difficult terrain. Elena spent her first night in the mountains less than 500 meters from her target, hidden in a natural cave that she had explored during childhood hiking trips with Victor. The cave provided concealment and protection from weather, while offering clear sightlines to the settlement below. She used the darkness to move closer and gather additional intelligence about building layouts and personnel routines. During her nighttime reconnaissance, Elena made a discovery that transformed her mission from rescue operation to something much more urgent. The conversation she overheard between 2 guards confirmed that the children were scheduled to be moved to a different location at dawn, transported in vehicles that would take them far from any possibility of rescue. The timeline eliminated any option for Elena to withdraw and coordinate with military forces. If the children were going to be saved, it would happen within the next 6 hours, and it would happen as the result of actions Elena took entirely on her own. Elena returned to her cave and spent the remaining hours before dawn developing a plan that balanced her capabilities against the risks involved. She had 1 rifle with 12 rounds of ammunition, limited explosives knowledge, and complete unfamiliarity with the internal layout of the building where prisoners were held. Against these limitations, she had superior marksmanship skills, intimate knowledge of local terrain, and the element of surprise that came from attempting something no one would expect. The plan Elena developed was necessarily simple. At dawn, when morning shift change created maximum distraction among the guards, she would eliminate the sentries watching the prisoner building from a concealed position. She would then approach the building directly, neutralize any additional guards inside, and evacuate the prisoners using forest routes that vehicles couldn't follow. The plan's success depended entirely on Elena's ability to make precision shots under pressure and to maintain tactical advantage through speed and accuracy. If she missed any critical shots, or if the facility contained more guards than she had observed, the mission would fail and Elena would likely join the prisoners she was trying to rescue. Elena checked and rechecked her equipment, ensuring that her rifle was properly zeroed and that she understood the ballistic requirements for shots at various ranges within the settlement. Victor's training had prepared her for hunting situations where one shot was often the only opportunity available. Now she would apply those same principles to a situation where lives depended on her ability to make multiple difficult shots in sequence. As darkness began giving way to pre-dawn grey, Elena moved to her firing position on a hillside overlooking the settlement. She had selected a location that provided clear sightlines to all critical targets while offering multiple escape routes if rapid withdrawal became necessary. The position was approximately 150 meters from the prisoner building, well within the range where Elena's accuracy was essentially perfect. Elena's first targets would be the 2 guards posted outside the barn where the children were held. Both men carried automatic rifles and maintained radio contact with other units in the settlement. Elena would need to eliminate both guards quickly enough to prevent either from communicating an alarm, then move immediately to prevent other personnel from responding to missing check-ins. Through her scope, Elena could see lights beginning to appear in windows throughout the settlement as the morning shift prepared to begin duties. She estimated perhaps 20 armed men in total, spread across various buildings and patrol routes. Elena's advantage lay in the fact that none of them expected to face a threat that would come from direction and with capabilities they had no reason to anticipate. The sound of vehicle engines starting confirmed Elena's intelligence about the planned prisoner transfer. Trucks were being prepared to remove the children from the settlement, and Elena could see additional guards assembling near the barn in preparation for loading operations. The window for action was closing rapidly. Elena controlled her breathing and settled into the shooting position Victor had taught her years earlier when they hunted deer together in these same mountains. The familiar routine of sight alignment and trigger control helped steady nerves that threatened to interfere with the precision her mission required. She had practiced these shots thousands of times under various conditions, but never with consequences that extended beyond missing an animal or disappointing her grandfather. At exactly 6:15 in the morning, as the eastern sky showed the first hints of sunrise and guard shift change created a moment of confusion near the prisoner building, Elena Kozlov fired the first shot of what would become known in military circles as the most audacious solo rescue operation in modern history. The bullet crossed 150 meters of mountain air and struck her first target exactly where she had aimed, removing the primary guard threat with surgical precision. Before the sound of the first shot had finished echoing off the surrounding mountains, Elena had acquired her second target and fired again. Two guards eliminated within 3 seconds of each other before either could react or communicate the presence of a sniper in the hills above their position. Elena's childhood, spent learning marksmanship from her grandfather, had prepared her for this moment without either of them understanding what that preparation was ultimately intended to accomplish. But eliminating two guards was only the beginning of Elena's mission. Now she had to move quickly down the hillside and into the settlement itself, where close-quarters combat would test skills that Victor had never taught her and courage that she would need to discover within herself. The 12 children whose lives depended on her success had no idea that help was coming from a direction no one would expect, delivered by someone with abilities that seemed impossible for an 18-year-old village girl. Elena herself was about to discover exactly what those abilities could accomplish, when survival and success required her to use every lesson Victor had ever taught her, and some lessons she would need to learn while lives hung in the balance. The mountain dawn that witnessed Elena's first shots would also witness the transformation of a skilled hunter into something much more dangerous and much more necessary. Elena's descent from her sniper position required every skill Victor had taught her about moving silently through rough terrain. The slope below her firing point was steep and covered with loose rocks that could easily betray her approach with noise. She moved in the pre-dawn light using techniques learned during countless hunting expeditions, placing each footstep carefully and using natural cover to mask her progress. The settlement below had not yet responded to the loss of the two guards. Eleanor had positioned their bodies to appear as though they were still at their posts when viewed from a distance, buying precious minutes before other personnel would discover what had happened. Those minutes would determine whether her rescue operation succeeded, or whether she joined the prisoners she was trying to save. As Elena reached the edge of the settlement, she encountered her first unexpected complication. A third guard was patrolling near the barn, someone she had not observed during her surveillance because his route kept him hidden behind buildings most of the time. Elena found herself within 30 meters of an armed man who would certainly detect her presence if she attempted to approach the prisoner building directly. Elena made a decision that revealed how thoroughly Victor's training had prepared her for situations requiring instant adaptation. Instead of retreating or attempting to avoid the guard, she used hand signals and movement techniques to position herself where the patrol route would bring him directly to her. When the guard rounded the corner of a storage building, Elena was waiting with a knife Victor had given her for field dressing game. The encounter lasted less than 10 seconds and ended with Elena dragging an unconscious guard into shadow where he would not be discovered immediately. She had avoided killing someone who might be a local civilian pressed into guard duty rather than a professional soldier. The decision reflected both tactical thinking and the moral framework Victor had taught her about using only necessary force. Elena reached the barn where the children were held without encountering additional guards, but she discovered that the building's entrance was secured with a heavy wooden bar that would require significant noise to remove. The sound would certainly alert other personnel in the settlement, eliminating any remaining element of surprise. Elena needed a different approach. The solution came from her childhood knowledge of similar buildings throughout the mountain region. Barns like this one typically had secondary entrances used for loading hay or moving equipment, entrances that might not be as heavily secured as the main door. Elena circled the building quietly, looking for alternative access points while maintaining awareness of potential threats from other directions. She found what she was looking for on the barn's eastern side, A loading door, approximately 2 meters above ground level, accessible using a wooden ladder that had been left propped against the wall. The door was secured with a simple rope latch, rather than the heavy bar that protected the main entrance. Elena could reach this access point without creating noise that would alert the entire settlement. Elena climbed to the loading door and carefully opened it wide enough to see inside the barn. What she observed changed her understanding of the rescue operation's complexity. The 12 children from the nearby village were there, but they were not alone. 8 adult civilians and 3 captured government soldiers were also being held in the same space, guarded by 2 men with automatic weapons who had positioned themselves near the main entrance. The guards inside the barn had not yet discovered that their colleagues outside had been eliminated. They were focused on preparing the prisoners for transport, organizing them into groups and checking restraints in preparation for loading them into vehicles. Elena realized that her window of opportunity was closing rapidly as dawn approached, and transfer operations intensified. Elena's plan required immediate adaptation. Instead of a simple rescue of 12 children, she was now facing a situation involving 23 prisoners and 2 armed guards in an enclosed space, where any mistake could result in multiple casualties. The marksmanship skills that had served her well at long range would be less relevant in close quarters where precision shots could endanger the people she was trying to save. From her position in the loading doorway, Elena could see that the prisoners had been divided into 3 groups, positioned at different locations within the barn. The children were clustered near one wall. The adult civilians were in the center of the space, and the 3 soldiers were bound separately near the far wall. The guards moved between these groups, checking preparations and communicating with someone outside via radio. Elena realized that successfully eliminating the 2 guards would only solve the immediate problem. The prisoners were restrained and would require time to organize and evacuate. Other personnel in the settlement would discover the missing guards within minutes and would respond with overwhelming force. Elena needed to create a diversion that would draw attention away from the barn while she organized the prisoner evacuation. The solution required using equipment she had not originally planned to employ. Among the items Colonel Dov had lost near his command post were small explosive charges designed for demolition work. Elena had included them in her pack without specific plans for their use, but the tactical situation had evolved to require exactly the kind of diversion they could provide. Elena carefully climbed down from the loading door and positioned herself where she could observe both the barn entrance and the main settlement area. Her plan required precise timing. Detonate the explosives to create maximum distraction, eliminate the guards inside the barn during the confusion, then evacuate all prisoners using forest routes before responding personnel could organize an effective pursuit. The explosive charges were designed to destroy equipment rather than harm personnel, but Elena placed them near fuel storage areas and vehicle parking where the secondary effects would create sustained confusion. She had learned enough about tactical operations from Victor's stories to understand that successful diversions required sustained rather than momentary distraction. Elena triggered the first explosion at 625, sending a fuel storage tank into spectacular flames that immediately drew attention from throughout the settlement. The second explosion followed 30 seconds later, destroying 2 vehicles and creating enough noise and confusion to mask other sounds. Elena used the chaos to re-enter the barn through the loading door while the guards inside were distracted by the commotion outside. The 2 guards had moved toward the main entrance to investigate the explosions, positioning themselves exactly where Elena needed them to be. Her first shot eliminated the guard closest to the prisoners, preventing any possibility of retaliation against helpless people. Her second shot neutralized the remaining threat before either guard had time to understand that they were under attack from an unexpected direction. Elena immediately began cutting restraints and organizing prisoners for evacuation. The children were frightened and confused, but they responded to her calm instructions and followed her directions without hesitation. The adult civilians required more explanation, but they quickly understood that rescue was taking place and began helping with evacuation preparations. The 3 captured soldiers presented Elena with a tactical decision that would influence the success of her entire operation. They were trained personnel who could assist with evacuation and security, but they were also legitimate military targets if they chose to resume active duty once released. Elena decided to free them while making clear that their priority must be civilian protection rather than combat operations. Elena led the first group of evacuees consisting of the 12 children and 4 adult civilians out through the loading door and toward the forest routes she had planned for withdrawal. The remaining prisoners would follow in a second group, but Elena needed to ensure that the first group reached safety before returning for the others. The evacuation route Elena had selected led through dense forest that would prevent vehicle pursuit while providing multiple options for concealment if ground forces attempted to follow on foot. The path required climbing over difficult terrain, but it offered the best chance of reaching friendly territory without encountering organized resistance. Elena's tactical training from Victor proved essential during the evacuation phase. She positioned herself at the rear of the group, where she could provide security against pursuit while monitoring the overall progress of the evacuation. The children followed her instructions precisely, moving quickly and quietly through forest terrain that would have challenged experienced hikers. The first indication of organized pursuit came approximately 1 hour after Elena's initial assault on the settlement. Helicopter sounds echoed through the mountains, suggesting that enemy forces were conducting aerial reconnaissance to locate the escaped prisoners. Elena led her group into heavy forest cover and instructed everyone to remain motionless while aircraft passed overhead. Elena's knowledge of local terrain provided advantages that pursuing forces could not match. She knew locations where natural caves and rock formations would provide concealment from aerial observation. She understood which routes would be passable for her group while remaining inaccessible to vehicles or large military units. Most importantly, she knew how to navigate by natural landmarks that would not appear on maps available to enemy forces. The evacuation continued through the morning hours, with Elena making tactical decisions based on changing conditions and evolving threats. When radio communications suggested that pursuit teams were moving to intercept her planned route, she altered course toward alternative paths that would reach friendly territory through unexpected directions. Elena's most critical decision came when the group encountered a government military patrol that had been dispatched to assist with the rescue operation. Colonel Davidov had apparently decided that Elena's mission warranted official support, and he had positioned friendly forces along routes where she might attempt to reach safety. The meeting between Elena's evacuation group and the government patrol occurred at a mountain crossroads where multiple trails converged. Elena had to quickly identify the approaching personnel as friendly forces rather than additional threats, then coordinate the transfer of prisoners to official military protection. Lieutenant Markov, the patrol leader, recognized Elena from her visit to the command post and immediately understood the significance of what she had accomplished. The 12 children and civilian prisoners represented intelligence and propaganda victories that far exceeded the value of conventional military operations. Elena had succeeded where professional military units might have failed. Elena's insistence on returning to evacuate the remaining prisoners created the mission's most dangerous phase. The settlement would be fully alert by now, and return routes that had been safe during the initial assault would certainly be under surveillance. Elena would be operating without the element of surprise that had made her initial success possible. Lieutenant Markov offered to provide military support for the second evacuation, but Elena declined the assistance. Additional personnel would increase the likelihood of detection and might escalate the situation into conventional combat that could endanger the remaining prisoners. Elena believed she could succeed using the same stealth tactics that had worked initially. Elena's return journey to the settlement took 3 hours, following indirect routes that avoided areas where pursuit teams might have positioned themselves. She approached the barn from a different direction, using natural cover and careful observation to assess whether the location was still secure enough for a second rescue operation. What Elena discovered challenged every assumption about how enemy forces would respond to her initial attack. Instead of evacuating the remaining prisoners to more secure locations, they had decided to use them as bait for a trap designed to capture whoever had conducted the original rescue operation. The barn now contained only the 3 captured soldiers, while the adult civilians had been moved to unknown locations. Guards had been positioned in concealed locations around the building, waiting for Elena to return. Enemy forces had correctly anticipated that whoever had rescued the children would attempt to save the remaining prisoners as well. Elena found herself facing the most complex tactical challenge of her mission: how to rescue 3 trained soldiers from a prepared ambush while operating alone against numerically superior forces that now knew her capabilities and expected her return. The solution would require using every skill Victor had taught her, plus tactical innovations that neither of them had ever imagined would be necessary. Elena was about to discover whether the confidence that had carried her this far was justified, or whether she had finally encountered a situation that exceeded her abilities to resolve successfully. Elena spent 2 hours observing the settlement from multiple positions before she fully understood the scope of the trap that had been prepared for her return. Enemy forces had positioned themselves with careful attention to tactical principles, creating overlapping fields of fire that would eliminate escape routes and ensure that anyone approaching the barn would be caught in a coordinated ambush. Hidden observation posts had been established in 3 buildings surrounding the barn, each manned by pairs of guards with automatic weapons and radio communication. Additional personnel were positioned along the forest routes Elena had used during her initial approach, waiting to intercept anyone attempting to withdraw after falling into the main trap. The entire operation demonstrated professional military planning that exceeded the capabilities Elena had observed during her initial reconnaissance. Elena realized that enemy forces had received reinforcement and professional leadership since her morning assault. The men now defending the settlement were not the same irregular troops she had encountered initially. These were trained soldiers with combat experience and tactical knowledge that matched or exceeded her own capabilities. The tactical challenge Elena faced had fundamentally changed. Her initial success had been achieved through superior marksmanship and knowledge of local terrain, advantages that remained relevant but would not be sufficient against professionally planned defenses. Elena would need to develop entirely new approaches that use psychological and strategic elements, rather than relying solely on her shooting skills. Elena's assessment of enemy capabilities led to an important realization about their tactical assumptions. The ambush had been designed to capture a military rescue team, not a single individual with unconventional capabilities. Enemy forces had positioned themselves to counter vehicle assault, helicopter insertion, or coordinated infantry attack. They had not prepared for threats that would approach using methods no military unit would employ. Elena's advantage lay in her willingness to attempt approaches that trained soldiers would consider tactically unsound. Professional military personnel operated according to doctrines that emphasized overwhelming firepower and coordinated action. Elena could succeed by using methods that violated conventional military wisdom while exploiting gaps in enemy preparations. Elena's plan required equipment and techniques that pushed the boundaries of what one person could accomplish alone. She would need to create multiple simultaneous threats that would force enemy personnel to respond to attacks coming from different directions at the same time. Success would depend on her ability to maintain initiative while preventing enemy forces from coordinating their response effectively. The equipment Elena needed for her counterattack came from careful observation of enemy positions and identification of vulnerabilities that could be exploited using improvised methods. Enemy guards had positioned themselves in buildings that provided excellent fields of fire but limited mobility. Elena could use those same positions against their occupants by creating threats that required immediate response while limiting their ability to reposition. Elena's first objective involved eliminating the observation posts that provided early warning of approaching threats. The posts were positioned in buildings that offered commanding views of surrounding terrain, but they could be approached using routes that would not be visible from other enemy positions. Elena could attack each post individually while preventing communication with other defenders. Elena's approach to the first observation post required technical climbing skills that she had learned during childhood explorations of mountain cliffs and rock formations. The building chosen for the post was constructed against a steep hillside, with one wall that could be reached by someone willing to climb difficult terrain that would be inaccessible to most people. Elena spent 30 minutes reaching a position directly below the observation post, moving through areas where loose rocks and steep grades prevented detection, while requiring exceptional physical conditioning and balance. Victor's training had included extensive hiking and climbing that prepared Elena for exactly this kind of demanding approach. The elimination of the first observation post required Elena to demonstrate capabilities that went beyond marksmanship, to include close combat skills that she had developed through years of physical training with Victor. The two guards inside the building were eliminated quickly and silently, preventing any communication with other enemy positions while securing weapons and equipment Elena could use for subsequent operations. Elena's acquisition of enemy radio equipment provided intelligence that transformed her understanding of the tactical situation. Communications between guard positions revealed that enemy forces expected the rescue attempt to occur during darkness, when conventional military units would have advantages in mobility and coordination. They were not prepared for assault during daylight hours when Elena's superior knowledge of local terrain would provide maximum advantage. The intelligence also revealed that the 3 captured soldiers were being held in the barn's basement, a location Elena had not known existed during her initial reconnaissance. Enemy forces were using the prisoners as bait while positioning them in a location where rescue attempts would require entering the barn through heavily defended approaches. Elena would need to find alternative access to the basement that would not trigger the prepared ambush. Elena's investigation of the barn's construction revealed architectural features that provided unexpected options for approach and entry. The building had been constructed using traditional mountain techniques that included root cellars and storage areas, accessible through external entrances that were not visible from most observation angles. Elena could potentially reach the prisoners without entering the barn through its main level. The external basement entrance, Elena discovered, was secured but not guarded, suggesting that enemy forces did not expect anyone to know about its existence. Elena could access this entrance using approach routes that would not expose her to observation from any of the prepared ambush positions. Success would depend on her ability to free the prisoners and evacuate them without triggering response from guards waiting in the barn's main level. Elena's entry into the basement required lockpicking skills that Victor had taught her during their exploration of abandoned buildings in remote mountain areas. The techniques were simple but effective, allowing Elena to open the basement door without creating noise that would alert personnel in other parts of the building. Inside the basement, Elena found the 3 captured soldiers in better condition than she had expected. They had been fed and provided with basic medical care, suggesting that enemy forces intended to use them for prisoner exchanges rather than simple elimination. The soldiers were alert and capable of participating in their own rescue, which would simplify Elena's evacuation planning significantly. Captain Kozlowski, the senior captured officer, recognized Elena from intelligence briefings about the morning's rescue operation. He understood immediately that Elena had returned to complete the prisoner evacuation despite enormous risks to her personal safety. The captain's tactical experience would prove invaluable during the escape phase of Elena's operation. Elena's plan for evacuating the captured soldiers required coordination that tested her ability to manage complex operations under pressure. The basement provided concealment, but escape routes from the building would expose the group to observation and attack from multiple enemy positions. Elena would need to create diversions that would mask their withdrawal while preventing pursuit. Elena's use of captured equipment allowed her to implement deception tactics that would have been impossible using only her original resources. Enemy radio communications could be monitored to determine when guards were changing positions or responding to threats. Captured weapons provided backup firepower if close combat became necessary during the escape. The execution of Elena's basement rescue began at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, when radio intercepts suggested that some enemy personnel were being rotated to rest positions. Elena had identified a 15-minute window when observation coverage would be reduced enough to allow movement from the basement to concealment positions outside the settlement. Elena's movement of the 3 soldiers from basement to forest cover required using every tactical principle Victor had taught her about moving undetected through hostile territory. The group moved in single file, with Elena leading, using natural features and shadow to avoid detection while maintaining speed necessary to reach safety before enemy patrols could respond. The escape route Elena selected led through the same ravine she had used for her initial approach to the settlement, but in reverse direction that would take advantage of terrain features that provided concealment from pursuit. The captured soldiers understood tactical movement principles and followed Elena's lead without requiring detailed explanation of her methods. Elena's group had achieved approximately 1 kilometer of separation from the settlement when enemy forces discovered that the basement prisoners had been rescued. Radio communications Elena monitored revealed confusion and anger among enemy personnel who had not detected any approach or assault on their positions. Their carefully prepared ambush had been circumvented through methods they had not anticipated. Elena's withdrawal with the rescued soldiers was complicated by enemy response that included both ground pursuit and aerial reconnaissance. Helicopter sounds indicated that enemy forces were conducting systematic searches of withdrawal routes, while radio traffic suggested that multiple patrol teams were being positioned to intercept Elena's group at likely escape corridors. Elena's knowledge of mountain terrain provided critical advantages during the pursuit phase of her mission. She led the group through areas where helicopter observation would be limited by forest cover and steep terrain that would prevent effective aerial assault. Ground pursuit would be channeled into specific routes where Elena could use defensive positions if direct confrontation became unavoidable. The most dangerous phase of Elena's escape occurred when her group encountered an enemy patrol that had been positioned along one of the main withdrawal routes. Elena had to make immediate tactical decisions about whether to avoid contact through difficult terrain movement or to eliminate the patrol using direct assault that would reveal her group's location to other enemy forces. Elena chose to engage the patrol directly, using marksmanship skills and positioning advantages to eliminate the threat before it could communicate her group's location. The action required Elena to demonstrate under combat stress the shooting abilities that Victor had helped her develop during years of practice in these same mountains. The engagement lasted less than 2 minutes, and resulted in Elena's group acquiring additional weapons and equipment while eliminating a significant threat to their escape. Captain Kozlowski observed Elena's performance with growing recognition that he was witnessing tactical capabilities that exceeded those of most professional soldiers he had known. Elena's successful extraction of all 3 soldiers was completed when her group reached friendly positions established by Lieutenant Markov's patrol. The meeting occurred at a defensive position chosen for its tactical advantages and its accessibility to evacuation routes that would remove all rescued personnel from the operational area. Colonel Davidoff himself was present at the extraction point, having recognized that Elena's mission had achieved strategic objectives that warranted high-level attention. The successful rescue of 15 prisoners, including government soldiers who possessed valuable intelligence about enemy operations, represented a significant tactical victory that had been accomplished without conventional military resources. Elena's debriefing with Colonel Davidov revealed the scope of what she had achieved through individual initiative and unconventional methods. Her mission had eliminated multiple enemy positions, disrupted their operational security, and demonstrated vulnerabilities in their defensive preparations that could be exploited by subsequent military operations. More importantly, Elena's success had proved that carefully applied individual capabilities could accomplish objectives that conventional military operations might have failed to achieve. Her knowledge of local terrain, combined with exceptional marksmanship skills and tactical thinking, had created opportunities that were not available to larger, more conventional forces. Colonel Davidov's immediate recommendation was that Elena receive formal military training that would enhance her natural abilities while providing her with resources and support appropriate to her demonstrated capabilities. Elena had proved herself capable of independent operations that achieved strategic objectives, and her continued development could provide significant advantages in future conflicts. Elena's response to the colonel's recommendations revealed the character that had made her mission successful. She appreciated the recognition and the opportunities being offered, but her primary concern remained the safety and welfare of people in her community who continued to face threats from ongoing regional conflicts. Elena's transformation from village girl to tactical operator had been completed during a single day of combat operations, but her commitment to protecting innocent people had remained constant throughout that transformation. The skills Victor had taught her had found their intended purpose, and Elena had discovered capabilities within herself that would define her role in the larger conflicts that continued to threaten her mountain homeland. Elena's return to Krasny Bor, 3 days after her rescue mission, found her village transformed by news of what she had accomplished. Stories of the 18-year-old girl who had single-handedly rescued 15 prisoners from a fortified enemy position had spread throughout the region, carried by refugees, soldiers, and officials who understood the significance of her achievement. Victor waited for Elena at their kitchen table, the same place where she had first held his hunting rifle 11 years earlier. The old man's face showed pride mixed with concern, recognizing that his granddaughter had crossed a threshold that would forever change her relationship with the world around her. Elena was no longer a village girl with exceptional shooting skills. She had become someone whose capabilities would be sought by forces much larger and more dangerous than regional conflicts. Elena's account of her mission revealed to Victor how thoroughly his training had prepared her for challenges he had never imagined she would face. Every lesson about patience, precision, and tactical thinking had found application during her rescue operation. But Victor also recognized that Elena's success had been achieved through qualities that went beyond technical skills, to include moral courage and strategic thinking that she had developed independently. Colonel Davidov's arrival in Krasny Bor the following morning confirmed Victor's understanding that Elena's life had fundamentally changed. The colonel brought formal recognition of Elena's achievements, including commendation documents that would become part of military records, but he also brought offers that would require Elena to leave her mountain home for training and service with specialized military units. Elena's conversation with Colonel Davidov took place in Victor's workshop, surrounded by the tools and equipment the old man had used to teach his granddaughter skills that had saved 15 lives. The colonel's proposals were respectful and generous, offering Elena opportunities for education, training, and service that would develop her abilities while providing compensation and recognition appropriate to her demonstrated value. The choice Elena faced represented competing visions of how her capabilities should be employed. Military service would provide resources and support that could enhance her effectiveness while contributing to larger strategic objectives. Remaining in her village would limit her impact to local situations, but would preserve the connection to community and landscape that had shaped her character and abilities. Elena's decision reflected the same clear thinking that had guided her through the complexities of her rescue mission. She would accept training opportunities that would enhance her skills and understanding, but she would not commit to permanent military service that might require her to operate in conflicts where her moral compass would not provide clear guidance. Elena's arrangement with Colonel Davidov established a unique relationship between military authorities and an individual operator whose capabilities exceeded conventional categories. Elena would receive advanced training and equipment while maintaining independence to choose when and where her skills would be employed. She would serve as a specialized resource for situations that required unconventional approaches, but she would not become a regular military asset subject to standard deployment requirements. Elena's training began immediately with instruction from specialists, who recognized that her natural abilities required enhancement rather than fundamental restructuring. Her marksmanship was already exceptional, but she could benefit from knowledge about advanced equipment, communications, and tactical coordination with other units. Most importantly, she needed exposure to strategic thinking that would help her understand the broader implications of individual operations. Training took place at facilities designed for unconventional warfare instruction, where Elena worked with instructors who had experience in special operations and intelligence activities. Elena's classmates included personnel with diverse backgrounds, but none had achieved operational success comparable to her independent rescue mission. Elena's presence in the training program represented recognition that exceptional individual capabilities could be as valuable as conventional military resources. Elena's development during training revealed the depth of potential that Victor's teaching had established. Advanced instruction in tactics, technology, and strategy built naturally upon the foundation of patience, precision, and independent thinking that Elena had learned during years of hunting in the Carpathian Mountains. Elena absorbed new knowledge while maintaining the moral framework that had guided her rescue mission. Elena's first official assignment after completing training involved a situation remarkably similar to her original rescue operation. Government forces had received intelligence about civilian prisoners being held in a remote location accessible only through difficult terrain. Conventional military assault would likely result in prisoner casualties, but careful individual infiltration might achieve rescue objectives without triggering defensive responses that would endanger innocent people. Elena's approach to her first official mission demonstrated how professional training had enhanced rather than replaced her natural capabilities. She used advanced equipment and communications while maintaining the stealth techniques and terrain knowledge that had made her original operation successful. The mission resulted in successful rescue of 8 civilian prisoners without casualties, among either the rescued individuals or enemy personnel who chose to surrender rather than resist. Elena's reputation within military and intelligence communities grew through a series of successful operations that showcased her unique combination of technical skills and tactical judgment. Her methods influenced training programs and operational doctrines, proving that individual operators with exceptional capabilities could achieve objectives that larger units might approach less effectively. Elena's relationship with her village and her grandfather remained central to her identity despite her expanded role in regional conflicts. She returned to Krasny Bor between assignments, helping Victor with seasonal work and maintaining connections with the community that had shaped her character. The contrast between her military activities and village life provided perspective that kept her grounded in values that transcended tactical success. Victor's health began declining during Elena's second year of military service, forcing Elena to confront the reality that the man who had shaped her capabilities would not be present indefinitely to provide guidance and support. Victor's gradual withdrawal from active life created opportunities for Elena to assume responsibilities for their property and to consider how her skills might be employed closer to home. Elena's decision to limit her military service and focus on regional security represented a conscious choice to prioritize community protection over career advancement. She recognized that her abilities could contribute to larger strategic objectives, but she believed her most important role involved protecting people and places that had personal meaning rather than abstract political objectives. Elena's transition to civilian life with military connections established a pattern that would define her activities for years to come. She maintained training and equipment that kept her capabilities current while focusing primarily on threats that directly affected her community. Elena became a resource that regional authorities could request for specific situations, but she retained independence to evaluate each situation according to her own moral standards. Elena's involvement in community defense activities revealed how naturally her skills translated to civilian protection roles. She organized training programs for local volunteers, established early warning systems for potential threats, and developed response plans that utilized local terrain knowledge and community resources. Elena's military experience informed these activities while maintaining focus on protecting innocent people rather than achieving tactical victories. Elena's marriage to Captain Kozlowski, one of the soldiers she had rescued during her first mission, represented personal growth that complemented her professional development. Their relationship was built on shared understanding of tactical challenges and moral responsibilities that created partnership in both personal and professional activities. Captain Kozlowski's military experience provided strategic perspective that enhanced Elena's operational capabilities. Elena's establishment of a training facility near Krasny Bor created opportunities to pass on the skills and knowledge she had developed while maintaining connection to the landscape that had shaped her abilities. The facility attracted students from military and civilian backgrounds, who recognized that Elena's methods offered advantages not available through conventional training programs. Elena's influence on tactical doctrine and training methodologies extended far beyond her individual operations. Military academies studied her missions as examples of how unconventional approaches could achieve objectives that conventional methods might not accomplish effectively. Elena's emphasis on moral considerations and community connection influenced discussions about the role of individual operators in modern conflicts. Elena's legacy was ultimately defined not by the tactical successes she achieved, but by the demonstration that exceptional individual capabilities, when guided by clear moral principles and community commitment, could make decisive differences in situations where conventional resources would be insufficient. Elena proved that one person with the right skills and moral courage could accomplish objectives that entire military units might fail to achieve. Victor's death during Elena's 25th year marked the end of an era, but confirmed the permanence of what he had accomplished through his granddaughter. The skills and values he had taught Elena continued to influence her activities and to shape the training she provided to others. Victor's legacy lived on through Elena's commitment to protecting innocent people and through the students she trained in methods that honored his memory. Elena's continuing operations in the Carpathian Mountains maintained security for communities throughout the region while serving as demonstration that individual capability and community commitment could provide alternatives to conventional military and political solutions. Elena's presence deterred threats while her training programs enhanced local defense capabilities. Elena's story became part of regional folklore, but its significance extended beyond entertainment to provide inspiration for people facing their own challenges and threats. Elena's example proved that ordinary individuals could develop extraordinary capabilities when they committed themselves to protecting others and when they received proper training and support for their natural abilities. Elena's impact on military thinking and community defense established principles that influenced security approaches throughout Eastern Europe. Her combination of individual excellence and community commitment provided models for other regions facing similar challenges. Elena's methods demonstrated that effective security could be achieved through approaches that emphasized protection rather than domination. Elena's continued service to her community 20 years after her first rescue mission confirmed that her original motivation remained unchanged. Elena had developed from a village girl with exceptional shooting abilities into a regional security resource whose capabilities were respected by military professionals and government officials, but her primary commitment remained the protection of innocent people who could not protect themselves. Elena's final assessment of her career emphasized the importance of values in community connection over tactical achievements or professional recognition. Elena had proved that individual capabilities, when developed through proper training and guided by clear moral principles, could make decisive contributions to peace and security. Her story demonstrated that heroes were not born but created through commitment, training, and the courage to act when action was necessary. The mountain trails where Elena learned to hunt still echoed with the lessons Victor had taught about patience, precision, and responsibility. Elena's students continued to learn those same lessons, ensuring that the knowledge and values that had made her mission possible would continue to protect innocent people long after Elena herself had completed her service. Elena's transformation from village girl to tactical operator to community protector illustrated possibilities that existed for individuals willing to develop their capabilities and commit themselves to purposes larger than personal advancement. Elena's story proved that one person, properly prepared and morally committed, could indeed make differences that mattered to the people whose lives were at stake.